Hey, what's up, what's up? Ladies and gentlemen, we got AP Human Geography Review going down at 7:01. Sorry I wasted y'all's minute there. I was trying to get some last-minute setups going on. We're going to do something a little bit different today. At the end, when I get done, we're going to play a little bit of just a 12-question Kahoot. So if you guys are wanting to do that, we might go a little bit over an hour today. That's fine. I got a lot of good stuff to talk to you guys about having to do with AP Human Geography, agriculture, the agricultural regions that we're going to talk about. So there's a lot of different ways to classify agriculture, and that's what we're going to do. Dylan Black, good to see you, man. Let's go ahead and share this screen before I forget what I'm doing here. I'm going to go ahead and get my presentation going for y'all. But what we're going to do in terms of our objectives today is we're going to be looking at classifying agriculture primarily. And we're looking at agricultural regions, but there's a bunch of different ways to break it down. So we're going to look at subsistence, commercial. We're going to look at intensive and extensive agriculture and figure out what that means in terms of, you guessed it, the spatial context, okay? We're also going to look at, oh, you know what? Wow, snap. Yeah, we're not looking at supply chains on this one. I didn't get that together. So we're gonna wait until we get to rural land use next week. Hopefully we'll get a chance to add this in there as well. So I should have taken that out, but I was having a hard time getting this stuff cranked out this week for some reason. For AP Human Geography, agriculture can be broken down into various classifications, as I just mentioned. Okay, check it out. The point is understanding the spatial context, the why of where. I've said that so many times. Your teacher probably says that like crazy. Hey, Vikram and Caitlin Barker, I appreciate having you guys today. Thanks a lot. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm glad y'all tuned in. So it's all about the why of where, ladies and gentlemen. When we look at region, when we look at agriculture, you can classify it by region, but you can also classify it by what it looks like. What I mean by that, in order to explain what I mean by that, is it's going to look different depending on where you are in the world based on development. Some people are there's going to be a lot of labor involved. Some there's going to be a lot of tractors and machines, and some are going to have computers and things like that. It really depends on your development level. That's kind of what we mean by that. Also, the purpose of it. So we got some subsistence and commercial, intensive and extensive. So listen, when we talk about subsistence and commercial agriculture, what do we mean? Well, commercial, you just watched the Super Bowl, right? A lot of you guys are like, hey, let's just watch the commercials, right? What's the point of a commercial? It's trying to get you to buy something, isn't it? It's trying to get you to buy something. So commercials have to do with things being bought and sold. Commercial agriculture is when people are going to sell agricultural goods for the purpose of trying to make a ton of money, not necessarily to feed themselves. Whereas subsistence, that's what you're looking at. I think I've got these defined a little bit later, so we're gonna move on just for a second, so I don't get too far ahead of myself. All right, but we also have developing and developed. Usually developing countries, and this is not always the case for either one of these. I mean, so we're kind of generalizing a little bit, but I mean, the idea here is to make sure that we have kind of a basic idea. And developing countries, or MDCs, as you'll sometimes see it called, they usually use machines, okay? There's usually, I'm sorry, I'm backwards here. Developed countries usually use machines, computers, and fertilizers. I got developed right here. I was reading the top line, but I was talking about developed. Developing usually is done by hand, a lot of the agriculture. Usually there's not a whole lot of capital. Now, smart kids, what do I mean by capital? I might have mentioned this the other day. Anybody know what that word means? Anybody know what capital is? Bam! John David English tells us what capital is. It's money. I mean, so really there might be other things that go into that. Like you might have capital goods, but these are going to be goods or products that are centered on somehow building up your business to be more productive. So when we're talking about capital, developing countries aren't going to have a lot of that. They're usually using hand tools and maybe an animal or so if they have it. But in developed countries, you just about can't do it if you're not going to use capital in order to buy these machines, computers, fertilizers. One thing that is a super big trend in our country is you see this reduction of the amount of farms in the United States, especially when it comes to dairy farms. Meanwhile, you see the productivity of farms increasing substantially and the size of them increasing. And the reason is simply because in countries like the United States, If you have the money to buy the capital goods or the machines and all that, and the fertilizer and everything required to be productive in agriculture, you're going to be the one that prevails. And if you're like a family farm kind of guy, it's going to cost a lot of money to keep your farm rolling, more or less. So what you're looking at here, you guys might have studied back in Unit 1. I'm not sure if you do that or not. I know that when I teach the class, I always spend a little bit of time at the beginning of the course while we're looking at every other map. You know what? Why not look at the Köppen Climate Map? Vladimir Köppen was some Russian dude a long time ago that kind of decided that we could more or less classify climate regions into mainly 5 different areas. And what you see here is your tropical, dry, humid, middle latitude, your polar, your highland. And usually what you'll see, and this here's probably not the best map, but usually what you're going to see is they're classified into letters, like your A, B, C, and so on and so forth. And then there's going to be lesser, I guess, sub classifications of each of those. Now, I'm not telling you guys that you need to memorize this map by any stretch. That's the last thing I'm saying. But you can eyeball it and put together some information about the world as we know it just by looking at this map. Basically, this right here is going to be your tropical region, and they all have similar climates along the equator. This is the equator. Okay, you've got your desert regions, and you can kind of make connections with that. You've got your polar regions in the purple. This right here is where I'm from. I'm in South Carolina, so you've got this region here. You've got your drier western regions of the United States, and once you put that with, we'll go back to that in a second. Once you go put that with Durant Whittlesey's 11 agricultural regions, which this I believe comes right out of your textbook if you're using Rubenstein, might not be the newest edition. But when you put the climate map together with Whittlesey's agricultural regions map, you can make some serious parallels with what's going on. Like, for example, this right here this is the equator, okay? You can see that there is a bunch of like-minded colors that represent the type of agriculture that's going on along the tropics, all right? So, again, here's the Köppen map, and then here's Whittlesey's agricultural region map. There's a lot of correlation. And that's the point. So that's part of what we're going to do here is I'm going to show you guys the different ways that regions based on climate correlate to where you're going to see certain types of agriculture done. And that's really important when you're looking at the spatial perspective, or I guess the why of where pertaining to agriculture. I just wanted to show you all this real quick. The Köppen Climate Classification Map. This here is what I was talking about. The A section, sometimes you'll see it called A, nothing else, represents tropical. B is dry. C is temperate. D is continental. E is polar. Those are pretty broad categories, like I said, that can be broken down. And several scientists, there's the name, I must have Googled it a million times. The name eludes me right now, but there was another guy who comes in after Köppen and kind of refines it a little bit. So sometimes you'll see the name kind of shared with the two. But here is Durant Whittlesey's map a little bit bigger, and you can kind of, I don't know if y'all can read this over here or not, but you can see the different agricultural regions listed out. And you also see another classification here, developing and developed. Now, it's pretty generalizing to say that none of this stuff is going to happen in LDCs and none of this is going to happen in MDCs. But more or less, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way it is, because there's two things that have a really big impact on the type of agriculture being done in one region from the next. And number one, development, because we already talked about how you need capital. You need money in order to invest in doing agriculture in a country like the United States. But then the other thing is obviously climate. If a crop won't grow in a cold climate, you cannot grow it up here, can you? What's anybody from up here in this area in New England? What's it, like 6 degrees there? It was like 70 today in South Carolina. No, not quite. More in the mid 60s. It was sunny and beautiful. I wouldn't trade my weather for nothing right now. But up here, it's really freaking cold. And so there are going to be some things that we can grow here in good old South Kakalaki that can't be grown in Maine. And that's just the way it is, no matter how hard you try. So climate has a big impact. Development has a big impact. And as a distant third, I'd say culture has a big impact. I talked last week about how you got people in, I think I said this last week. You got some people in Asian countries that produce rice when rice could basically be produced in other parts of the world as well. But culturally, they produce rice in these regions. And there's other examples of that as well. Can I go back to the Köppen map definition? Sure. There it is right there. And to be honest, I didn't do anything super sophisticated to find this definition. I think this came directly from Wikipedia. So if you Google Köppen Climate Map, you should see this as probably the very first link. And you know, that's just a simple way of looking at it. It also should be, and probably is referenced in, I believe it's referenced in the Rubenstein Chapter 1 book as well. And they have a brief section about it in the agriculture chapter as well. So agricultural regions, and hopefully I was there long enough. I don't mean to scoot on, but I just want to make sure I finish everything in an hour. But right here, this right here is when you put the two maps together, and you can definitely see these correlations between the different regions. And that's the main thing we're going to do. So you don't feel like you got to memorize all this. Yeah, you should know where tropical areas are more or less. You should be able to identify some of the dry areas. You should, by the time we're done with this, you'll kind of know a little bit what's going on in Europe and the Middle East and this region here, the Eurasian steppe region, Mongolia. You'll know about these things, but just very generally. You don't need to memorize any of this stuff. So the first thing I want to do is when we're classifying agriculture, another thing we can do is look at subsistence and commercial. And we just talked about this a little bit. I told you I was getting a little ahead of myself, but subsistence agriculture occurs when farmers grow crops to feed themselves and their families. Now, wait a second. Here's what my students are always asking. Because I would show this video that would, I don't know if you guys saw it during the population unit. You got this, my boy Hans Rosling. Okay, he just passed away like a week ago. I mean, not a week ago, a year ago or so. And your teacher probably bought his book and is probably super obsessed with him, like all of us are. But in his video about overpopulation being kind of like a really somewhat of a myth, he was talking about the idea, or there was a section in there where this farmer goes to market to sell his produce. Right. Well, if he is a subsistence farmer, which he is, then why is he going to market to sell his produce? Well, he's not selling it to make a ton of money like a career kind of way. He's selling it still to bring in enough income to support his family with whatever's left over. So they will eat the majority of your food. That doesn't stop them from going to market and selling a little bit, but it's still centered on taking care of the family of the farmer. All right. So that's subsistence agriculture. And this right here is kind of what it might look like. So all I did was Google subsistence agriculture, and I did a quick image search. And those are some of the images I could have clicked on. I just used a snipping tool to capture it. But that's why it might look like. Types of subsistence agriculture include wet rice agriculture. Sometimes you'll see it called paddy farming. That's really a way that we refer to it in North America. Most of the time, you might see it called, well, wet rice agriculture is the correct way. Usually, when you talk about the rice field, you'll see it called a sawa, S-A-W-A-H. And I'll show you that a little bit later on. Another type of subsistence farming is slash and burn, pastoralism. I'm not sure why I've got wheat and barley listed there. I really don't know why I've got there. But commercial, and I'll go into all that in a little bit more detail. So we're going to skip ahead just for a sec. But commercial farming is the other way around. All right, in this case, you're selling it because you're going to make a big buck on selling these goods. In commercial farming, crops are grown and animals are reared for sale at the market. That is for commercial purposes. You're selling this to a grocery store for it to get, or selling it to restaurants locally or whatever it might be, so they can be consumed, through those services. Subsistence farmers, on the other hand, are growing for the farmer's needs. And again, another way of looking at it is the production of crops and farm animals for sale, usually with the use of modern technology. So automatically, when you think about MDCs, more developed countries, and their agricultural practices, it's almost always going to be commercial. I'm not counting like your backyard garden in that, but I'm just saying that overwhelmingly farming in the United States is going to be commercial farming. That right there is what commercial farming might look like. So this right here is irrigation. These, I don't know if y'all ever have live in a rural enough area to see this, but I mean, in South Carolina, I can just go to one of the schools in my district and see sprinklers like this, and they're huge and they're mobile. This kind of irrigation costs way more money you're going to see in a poor country. plus the infrastructure, the roads to get it to where it needs to be, the people to put it together, the facilities to create these contraptions. They don't exist in developing countries. This right here, it looks like a giant, heck, I'm not even sure what that is. It looks like a giant combine of some kind. This is commercial agriculture. Types of commercial farming are going to include things like tobacco, cotton, coffee. We call these cash crops. Honestly, all of these are going to also be luxury crops. I don't know if I've got that on here or not, but when you talk about a luxury crop, it's not something that you need for sustenance. It's something that you need if you've got the money to enjoy it. All right. Believe it or not, hashtag first world problems, you won't die if you don't go to Starbucks in the morning. But you will die if you don't eat food. So that's kind of the difference here between specialty crops and everything else. Dairy, horticulture, we're going to talk about all these in a minute. But I just kind of wanted to show you all some examples here. The other way of looking at this, so we looked at subsistence and commercial. Another way is to break those two down into intensive and extensive. So when we look at intensive farming, there's a few ways to classify intensive. One, yields are going to be large compared to the amount of acreage that you're farming. Right? So when you think about intensive subsistence farming, a bunch of poor guys with regular hand tools and a bunch of manual labor producing crops on a farm, their farms are relatively small, but they completely maximize the amount of space that they have on that farm to produce as many yields as they possibly can. So that's what we mean by intensive farming. Another way to look at it is that indeed, especially when you're looking at intensive subsistence farming, there is an intense amount of labor that goes into it. Okay. LDCs, labor-intensive agriculture, large numbers of people and required little capital. So these guys aren't really spending a huge amount of money on on getting ready to produce their crop, but they're spending a huge amount of labor, and it's pretty intense. You can see this word intensive farming can be applied to not only subsistence, but also commercial. An example of a intensive farm or intensive farming practice in the United States might be dairy farms. They're not really that big, but they produce a ton of product to be used by people nearby, and even in some cases not so nearby. So I've got a question. Let's see what it is. What is the difference between yields and fields? Yields and fields. Yeah. Actually, pretty simple. I'm glad you asked that question because I can't assume that everyone on here knows the terminology. So if there's ever a situation where you need to ask me for terminology like that, feel free to do it. But yields mean that means how much the product you can produce. Okay. So if your field offers, or I guess you get a high amount of product from that field, that means you have high yields. In other words, you produced a lot of crops. Okay, that's what we mean by yields. And a field is simply going to be what it's grown on. So an example of this would be like if you remember Malthus, and he's talking about how our ability to produce on fields goes up linearly. All right, so we might have one field, two fields, three fields, but to increase yields or agricultural production, that's going to take a little bit more science and technology and things like that to happen with the second and third agricultural revolution. But simply, yields mean how much of a product is produced. Okay, so that's really the answer to that. Okay, so again, any questions y'all have for me, feel free to drop it down there, and I will get to it for sure. Extensive farming is different from intensive. All right, it takes place on a huge amount of land. And also the amount of inputs such as labor, fertilizers, capital relative to land is being farmed is really small. All right. So this will make more sense when we start looking at examples of extensive farming. But when you think about the amount of time, energy, labor, and in the developed world, capital goes into intensive farming, extensive farming is going to usually be way less labor relative to the amount of land, way less capital relative to the amount of land than what you're going to see in intensive farming. So extensive, low capital, low amount of people and labor per unit of land uses huge amounts of land. And so here's our map again. And if you look at livestock ranching, and you look at pastoral nomadism, okay, or even grain farming. So you look at these areas back here in the West. This is going to be mostly livestock and grain, okay? And then you look over here in this region where it's all blue. These are going to be your nomadic herders, or pastoralists, people that literally follow animals in cyclic patterns through territory kind of controlled by their tribe. We're talking very sparsely populated groups of people that practice these types of agriculture, and yet it takes up huge amounts of land compared to what they're going to get out of it. And so you can imagine that might cause some problems with governments where this territory is being utilized for grazing animals, where it could be urbanized, or where it could be that they tap into certain resources, or where it could be irrigated for cash crops, which can be sold then to MDCs and make a lot more money. So we're going to go with our breakdown. I've already basically shown you all this, but we're going to look at MDCs and LDCs and break down agriculture like this. First of all, looking at LDCs, and when I say LDC, I mean less developed country. Usually we call them developing countries. We like to think that they're developing. They're on their way to being developed. They're just not quite there yet. But these right here are going to be the regions that are predominantly considered LDCs when we talk about this type of agriculture. And so I circled them. I mean, that's not scientific. I know that there might be some rich countries that are circled in here and some countries that might not be exactly LDCs, but work with me here, right? So shifting cultivation. And now, one more thing that I want to point out to you guys before I go any further is I'm using primarily Rubenstein, the AMCO book, and the Ethel Wood review manual for the base of this PowerPoint. I feel like Rubenstein, mainly the 12th edition, but I used the 10th because I don't have the 12th to put together these slides. I feel like Rubenstein did a very good job here. He's very straightforward and to the point in terms of looking at the spatial context of where this agriculture is taking place. So you can almost follow along with me in the book. So just something to think about when you're studying for the test. A lot of what I'm looking at here is the same classifications in the Rubenstein book. But you've got this right here is your shifting agriculture. Sometimes you'll see it called slash and burn. The two terms are used synonymously. And that right there is pictures of at least the burning process. Now that might be a little misleading because at some point they're going to start growing crops. And this right here is probably just a small part of what slash and burn is, but it's the part that makes it kind of unique in the way that they approach it. And that is what you're looking at here is tropical regions. So places where there is a lot of natural lush vegetation like rainforest, for example. And the people that live in villages nearby are going to slash or cut down parts of the forest. And they're not going to do they're not going to cut everything. Notice there are some trees that are still standing. They're really going to cut the stuff the stuff that's easy to be cut with axe or machete. And then they're going to burn it down, controlled, systematically, and then it's going to leave a layer of potassium that's going to serve as natural fertilizer for that land. Okay, so that right there is kind of the process written out that I just described. At first, and this here is key, the land is going to be very, very productive. Okay, so they're going to have high yields in the first couple of years. Usually in the second year, they're going to have the highest yields they're going to get. They might also have high yields in the third year, but then at some point, the amount of crops they were able to produce, their yields are going to go down. And it's going to get to a point where the land is so barren and so used up and depleted that they have to move on, or they have to go to a different plot of land and repeat the process. Okay. So that's what slash and burn is. And really, you might think to yourself, this isn't so, I mean, how is that going to be? I mean, that's not so bad, right? Because after all, the vegetation is going to grow back at some point, and they're gonna move on, and they won't just leave something and never go back to it. These guys aren't nomads. I feel like one of the things that I heard a lot, or that my students would get mixed up with or something, is that people will consider shifting agriculture as a form of nomadism, and it's just not, because these dudes, they live in villages and they're settled society. So the village doesn't necessarily move. Just the land nearby that they use for farming is going to be changed over the course of several years. So they will perhaps after 3, 4, 5, 6 years or so, they will move on to other areas that are relatively nearby, and then they'll allow the old area that they were just now at to kind of regrow and get back to how it was. Problem is, it might take 30, 40 years or so for the land to regrow in the same way that it was. And oftentimes, because of growing populations and things like that, people that practice shifting agriculture don't necessarily give it enough time to completely regrow before they cut it down again. And the land never really completely gains the level of fertility that it had prior to. So you can see that as this process goes on, the land in general is going to become less fertile. There's going to be more possible desertification, which is the process by which land becomes completely barren, like a desert. All right. And then there's another problem too, where you have loads of emissions from the burning that can contribute to things like climate change globally. And also governments tend to go after shifting agriculture because they want to use the land to support cash cropping, which is way more of a moneymaker than shifting agriculture. Now, there's one thing I forgot to mention over here, and that is this word intertillage is a fancy way for you to say maybe another word is intercropping. It simply means that they grow a variety of crops. So you're not seeing one crop being grown here. They're growing certain vegetables, certain grains, certain cereals, certain fruits. They're going to grow as much variety as they can. Okay. So the main problem here is that relative to the amount of land being used, this is an example of extensive farming. They're using a lot of land to serve only a few people when it's all said and done. And there's also going to be your environmental issues, governments wanting it to be more economically used. So these are all different implications about the future of shifting agriculture. More and more, this type of lifestyle is being attacked by those who want to be more economically productive. And when I say that, I mean mainly countries. There might also be certain resources or things like that, or they might have other uses for land, such as urbanization. Here is this comes from a YouTube video that I'm going to share with you at the end of this slide presentation. But here's the map that kind of just shows areas that practice this. And it looks all fiery looking and all that. But I mean, the point here is that when you look at like this in this context, you got to think there is actually a pretty good bit of people practicing this across the earth. And it could be an issue for emissions. The next kind we're going to look at, let's see. All right, so the next kind we're going to look at is going to be your pastoral nomadism. All right, and I circled those areas to make them stand out a little bit better. These are areas that are going to be climatically very, very arid or semi-arid. So they're going to be very dry regions. This here is the Sahara Desert. Obviously, you're not going to see a lot of agriculture being done here. So it makes sense that people might want to practice some form of nomadism. They might follow their camels. You might see that in the Middle East as well. This one here is Mongolia, and this one here is kind of your steppe region, your Asian steppe region, which means when I say steppe, I mean like a grassy plain area that is really good for grazing certain types of animals. So people are going to follow pastors, and they are straight up nomadic, just like you hear about. I don't know if you guys study the Old Testament in the Bible, but Abraham, the father of the Hebrews, was a pastoral nomad. So, I mean, their wealth is measured by the size of their herds, and not so much the things they have, because you can't keep stuff if you're moving around and living in tents and traveling all the time. So what they would do is they would be on the move in an effort to find places for their herds to eat. And these are types of animals that you see a lot. They're being done in this way. So sheep, goats, cows, reindeer, camels, horses, all these different types of animals you might see pastoral nomads following around. And they're domesticated, all right? These guys aren't sedentary then, so because they're not settling down in a village, they're actually on the move, but they do actually have territory. So they're very territorial. You don't go into another tribe's territory unless there's an emergency or unless you're going in there to fight them or whatever it might be. Traditionally, just as a bit of historical tidbit, nomads were no joke. They were very, very warlike, very warrior type people. You think about the Mongols, the same Mongols that attacked and took over half of Asia. They were nomadic warriors. They were pastoralists. If you're used to riding on the back of a pony and being able to shoot animals while you're moving, I mean, if you can shoot a small rabbit or something, then what the heck is so hard about eating, or I guess shooting a slow human in the head while you're on a horse? So you can see where these guys would be really good warriors. Today, maybe not so much, because they're a little bit backwards compared to, and when I say backwards, I don't mean like culturally. What I mean is that technologically, you put someone who is a trained soldier with a gun in front of someone who's practicing their nomadic way of life that they've done for, 3,000 or 4,000 years, then, I mean, you can understand why nomadic, I guess, pastoralism is under attack. Transhumance is a different form of pastoral nomadism. And again, it's a cyclic migration pattern where you've got during the, I think I got a slide on this, during the summer months, you're going to go up the side of the mountain, and during the winter months, you come back down a little bit in order to keep a more regular, I guess, climate pattern. So it's a form of cyclic migration in which, and really a form of pastoralism in which people are going to move up and down a mountain during certain times of the year, based on the seasonal cycle. That right there is what it looks like. If you Google transhumance and just do an image search, that's all I did here. And I got several different pictures of mainly sheep and things like that. They are being moved, or as you can see, are clearly kind of at different levels of elevation along the mountain. Implications of pastoral nomadism. And I gotta get a move on because it's taking a long time. Pastoralism is declining due to modern technology. I just mentioned that. Another big attack on pastoralism is globalization. People can look and say, I can practice the way of life of my forefathers for all my life, and I know exactly what I'm going to get from that. Or I can go and get a Western-based education, learn English or French or Arabic or something like that, and have more of a higher standing in the global economy. And many people are choosing that. Also, you've got governments that are relocating groups. I just watched a documentary not too long ago that showed a little bit of this in Mongolia, where more and more people can't afford to take care of their herds, and they are forced to go to the city for a long amount of time, and their herds are going to die while they're gone. So you got a lot of issues like that. There's a lot of resources that are within the land that governments want to use and want to tap into. You also have, once again, like you did with slash and burn, land can be used in more productive ways sometimes, and governments want to take advantage of that. Intensive subsistence. When we're looking at here, we're mainly looking at wet rice agriculture, and here are the regions you're going to see that. All right. There's a process to this, and at the end of this video, I'm going to show you a YouTube video that kind of shows what this looks like. But in East and Southeastern Asia, you're going to see this, and the process, you start by planting seeds. Now, in the Rubenstein book, it says that they plant it on dry land. That's not always true. Sometimes you'll plant the seeds in a flooded field, but not the main flooded field. And this here, by the way, is what it looks like. You guys have all seen pictures of this, right? The hats are very, very common in this type. You always see these people bent over. I couldn't imagine what that would do to your back. Very, very hard work, very intense, labor-intensive work. Intensive subsistence agriculture looks like this. Once the seeds are planted, they are moved by hand into a bigger flooded plain. They're separated so that the rice can have room to grow, because it grows very, very much over time. It's raised for approximately 3 months, so not a very long span here for this process, and then it's harvested and threshed. When I say threshed, that means that they're going to separate the rice from, like, the actual rice grain from the plant. And they do that sometimes by beating it, and they do that sometimes in other types of ways as well. Intense labor at every step of the process, super hard work. Once the rice has been threshed, they will often leave it out and let it get sun-dried. The Rubenstein book calls this winnowing. This is also going to be a way of getting the debris that's not rice to blow away in the wind. terrace farming. Now, this here is super important because there was one picture right here that showed this, but I'm not sure if y'all caught it or not. But when you think about subsistence, I guess intensive subsistence agriculture, I mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation that they want to use as much of the land as completely possible in order to maximize yields. And so if you have land that's on the side of a hill or a mountain, you're going to see terrace farming. Definition 2 is what we're looking at. Each of a series of flat areas made on a slope used for cultivation. Okay, that's what it looks like. And those are cool pictures and all that, but usually before the terraces are built, you would see where these are just mountainsides or hillsides that could not be used for agriculture because the rain and wind would knock everything down. But because of the fact that it has been intentionally terraced by people, it allowed them to use parts of their land that they would normally not have been able to use for agriculture. Now, again, the field in wet rice agriculture is known as sawa. Sometimes you'll see it called paddy, and that's okay. I'm one of those people that I'm going to say it really doesn't. I would know both words if I were you for AP exam purposes, but at the end of the day, it's not about the different word, because you can say all day long that paddy isn't the correct word for this, but that's what most, I would say, North Americans are going to call it. So, I mean, perception is reality, right? So I would know both words, but it really isn't about what you call it. It's about the spatial perspective. So don't get too hung up on word usage. This right here is going to be areas where you see intensive subsistence with wet rice not dominated. In other words, you're not seeing the wet rice agriculture. Usually these guys are growing wheat and barley or some other type of cereal grain. All right. So another reason why you wouldn't see rice is because the areas where this is happening, the climate is maybe a little too harsh, meaning that the winters get too cold for rice. So part of the reason why you put rice in flooded fields is so that the water will actually keep the seedlings from getting too cold and will enable you to have high yields. So another reason is that usually areas where you're going to see wheat grown in subsistence agriculture is going to be due to them just generally being drier regions. All right. So I don't want to spend too much more time on that because it's very similar to the wet rice. Plantation agriculture. Now, we're still in LDC regions, right? But plantation is going to be a little bit different from everything else. And also notice tropical climate. Plantation agriculture happens in the same places you're going to see slash and burn. So it's the same basic region. But the difference here is when you're looking at plantation agriculture, it is commercial agriculture, not subsistence. All right. So you see the production of cash crops. You see the production of specialty crops, monoculture. When I talk about monoculture, that means there's one single crop being produced. Usually it does not have anything to do with the people that are producing it. So, for example, a lot of the people that might harvest coffee, they're not going to be able to afford the finished product. So coffee is harvested in tropical regions so that people like me in first world can drink it. All right. So, that's the case with most plantation crops. Did y'all know that rubber was a crop? Anybody know that? Anybody study world history and look at imperialism, the Dutch and the Congo area? Cocoa, jute. Jute is a crop that you use to make ropes out of. So if you Google jute, you'll be able to see that. Sometimes you'll see other fruits like banana and pea and things like that being done in plantation agriculture. Yes, Caitlin, rubber is grown on trees. Is that crazy? Overwhelmingly, agriculture in MDCs is going to be commercial agriculture. All right, so we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and start looking at MDCs. But there's a few things you got to know first, right off the bat. Commercial agriculture, all right? Also, MDC agriculture is characterized by huge amounts of capital for the investment of technology to produce high yields for profit. We've already talked about that, right? So some of those things they're invested in are going to be fertilizers and pesticides, tractors, machines, industrial irrigation, computers, because, I mean, you can put a computer or an iPad into some form of anything these days. So kind of getting through this, I'm going to try to get through it quick. When you look at MDC agriculture, and again, this is all on the map here, classified. So, and this is in your Rubenstein book if you use the cultural landscape. But mixed crop and livestock is exactly kind of what it sounds like. You're going to have a mix of crops being grown on a field on a farm while you're also seeing livestock being raised. And the thing is, though, is that most of the crops being produced are going to go back into becoming feed for the livestock. So you might see this on a lot of big time dairy farms where they might have a ton of corn that they grow out in the back, but they produce feed for their cows by using the corn to do that. And they don't actually consume the corn. So you might see a lot of that in certain mixed crop and livestock farms. Probably the stereotypical farm we all think about when we think about life on a farm, or when we watch some kind of Hallmark movie where the city girl goes and falls in love with a farm boy. A lot of this is going to be mixed crop and livestock farms. When you mix the two together, it reduces the seasonal variations in income. One thing, I don't know if you guys know very many farmers. I don't know very many farmers, but I went to a geography thing at my alliance not too long ago, and a guest speaker who was a 27-year-old farmer came and talked to us. And one of the things that she mentioned is that certain times of the year she might have more money than others based on what she's able to do and sell. She sells a bunch of flowers and vegetables and things like that. And during the off year, she's got to prepare for that, right? So there's going to be some areas or some times where she's way more productive in terms of the income she makes, and more times in other parts of the year where maybe not so much. So having both animals and crops are going to reduce a little bit of that. Another thing here too, most of the profit is going to come from the sale of animal products when you're looking at these mixed crop and livestock farms. Corn is going to be the most important crop being used on these types of farms. And again, most of it's being done for animal feed. Overwhelmingly, the majority of corn produced in our country is for purposes other than human consumption. Here's the corn belt. Now, when we talk about a belt, we're not talking about something you put around your waist. We're talking about a geographic region where you're going to see something predominate over other areas. Now, this isn't the only places on earth where you're going to see corn produced. I live in South Carolina, and you can go really in any direction about an hour, and you're going to see cornfields somewhere. But this is overwhelmingly going to be like huge amounts of corn being produced here because they support the animals on the farms. Grain farming is the next one we're going to look at, and you see it here in these regions, across. I mean, again, same kind of climatic areas in terms of your latitude and climate, but they're drier regions in your more developed countries. I've been to a corn belt. There's lots of it. My aunt has farmed. Yeah, I mean, if you ever, I've gone over this area once or twice when I was a kid. I haven't traveled nearly as much as you might would think I have as a geography teacher. But yeah, I mean, you see a lot of corn being produced. So here's one thing about grain farming. It's done in a very similar kind of climate as what you're going to see pastoralism. It's kind of a dry climate. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm thinking about livestock. I'm sorry about that. So grain farming, again, it is going to be a little bit drier, but it's going to be done in areas where you can grow extensive amounts of wheat, primarily, that can be sold for huge commercial gains. And that's what you're seeing here in your grain farming region. So if you look at this area here in the United States, it's known as the world's bread basket. Bread is made out of wheat. Actually, you make flour out of wheat. You make flour out of wheat. Yeah, that's right. And then bread out of flour, right? So that's the reason why you call this America's bread, or I guess the world's bread basket, really. We produce a huge amount of the world's wheat that's produced. I think between us and Canada, it's about half of all the world's wheat. And then we also export a lot of it. So wheat is a huge export crop. And this area where you're seeing grain farming predominate is primarily for human consumption. I'm going to stay hydrated, as my wartime Richie says. So agriculture, I guess agribusiness, is another part of this, okay? When you're looking at commercial agriculture, there are some groups, some agricultural groups that have so much, I guess they own so much of the process of something being a seed all the way to where it's being sold to someone. And that's how you classify agribusiness. I might not have done a good job of saying that, so I'm just going to read the definition. Agribusiness is when agriculture is conducted on commercial principles, especially having or using advanced technology. a group of industries, this is probably the best one, dealing with agricultural produce and services required in farming. So in other words, agribusiness companies might own the farms where the product is being produced. They might own the trucks that take it to a factory that they own as well. And it's manufactured and put together in a product in a way that can be consumed and then sold by that company. And the company owns basically every single part of that process. So a lot of this grain that's being produced in the Western United States is going to be sold to these larger companies like General Mills, Post, cereal companies, and other groups. And this is maybe a small little bit of them. Wheat is the world's leading export crop. The world's breadbasket. I have a picture here. And this doesn't necessarily show with the same amount of detail as what we had on the former map, but you get the picture. A lot of wheat's being done there. A huge amount of bread can be produced from that wheat. So that's the reason why we call it that. It's almost like another way of looking at it is a wheat belt, maybe. It's the same kind of thing. You got a geographic region known for its production of grain. This here is mentioned in too many of the review manuals for me not to break it down for you. So I'm going to do it real quick because I'm running out of time. But winter wheat, okay, is going to be done in your more southern regions, okay? So in areas like right here, right, that's your winter wheat regions. And you're going to see, let me go back to where I was. Spring wheat in places like the Dakotas, Montana, southern Saskatchewan. This is Canada, all right? So further up you go, it's going to be spring wheat. And simply the terminology means that in winter wheat, it's going to be harvested in the winter. In spring wheat, it's going to be harvested in the spring, okay? No, I'm sorry, I'm backwards. It's going to be planted in spring. Winter wheat is planted in the late fall, early winter, all right? So I wanted to show you guys that the climate has a say in what kind of wheat and where the wheat's going to be grown. But people still have the ability to adapt in ways that allow them to grow the same kind of crops. It's interesting to see it that way. Today, wheat is going to be harvested by combines. Now, you guys may remember, I think I mentioned it in the agriculture, in the second, when we talked about the first and second agricultural revolution, that there was a mechanical reaper created by an individual during the Industrial Revolution known as McCormick. Okay, and it was a mechanical reaper that basically took like the Grim Reaper's little scythe, which was used for harvesting wheat, and made it into a machine. Well, this here is like that completely jacked up on steroids, and that's what we use today on these massive, extensive commercial fields is some kind of a combine like this for harvesting. Almost to the end of the presentation, I'm trying to leave a little bit of time for the Kahoot. Livestock ranching, another form of extensive agriculture. The raising of livestock. Now, this here is going to go down in arid and semi-arid regions. I don't think I put the map up here, but again, just for reference, you're going to see that these areas here, forget my purple circled areas, the areas where my mouse is, that's going to be livestock. This right here is going to be livestock. This right here is a region known as the Pampas, which is like a grassy prairie kind of area. And this region here. Now, these areas are very similar in terms of a climate as what you would see for pastoralism. The difference is that they're different forms of commercial agriculture. Okay, ingrained in our culture in the United States, tied to the West, you see these westerns my grandma used to watch, and you will see a lot of ranchers and ranching and things like that going on. People will usually allow their cattle to just roam wherever the heck they wanted to go. Free-range cattle on the territory that was controlled, not owned, but controlled by ranchers who owned the cattle. The land would have been owned by the U.S. government. So we start to run into a situation. Okay, here's how it is. One, people started to build a lot of railroads in order to get across the country, and cattle would get on the railroads and it would cause problems. All right, that's one thing. You can imagine the problems that were. I don't know if you guys know that, but the little area, the little thing, the little triangular point on the bottom of a locomotive is known as a cattle guard because it is supposed to knock cows away so they don't splatter on the front of the locomotive whenever a train goes through. But you start to see where the government would start trying to sell some of that land to people to sell down as farmers. And this came into a cow catcher. Yeah. It came into direct conflict with ranchers who wanted to use that land in order to continue to grow their, or I guess to raise their animals. Okay. So you got this period in the 1880s known as range wars, where the two different groups, the farmers and the ranchers, would kind of battle each other for the use of this land. And eventually, farmers started using things like barbed wire in order to prevent animals from grazing on areas that could be I guess farmed. And you start seeing these ranching territories go down more and more and more as time goes on. Also, new technologies such as irrigation made it more possible for agriculture to be done, I guess, for like actual farming, crop farming to be done in the same territory. So ranching kind of began to wane a little bit. In the United States today, many ranches are owned by meat processing companies, okay, and are sold domestically. So a lot of the meat that we produce in our country, we eat it ourselves. Now, if you're looking at a country like Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, or the Middle East, those countries are a little bit less developed than we are. They're not necessarily LDCs in the same way that Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are LDCs, but a lot of their meat is being sold to other people where there's a higher demand. All right. Now, China, again, isn't necessarily MDC material, but more and more people in that country, more and more people in other countries as well, are starting to live middle-class lifestyles. And as they do, they want to do middle-class things like eat more meat. And so a lot of times you might see where more and more meat is being produced in some countries like that, and they also are consuming it. But generally speaking, this trend here, more of your LDCs are producing meat to be consumed in other countries. The United States, obviously, we eat the majority of our meat. And this here is South America, because I wanted y'all to see this pampas area. It says pampas right here. Sorry if y'all hear my kids screaming in the background. This region here is a grassland known for ranching. Really, any of this area here can have some ranching going down in it as well. And I wanted to show y'all that. She's having a hard time. Mediterranean. All right, so you've got, and I think it's the last one I'm going to talk about here because we're running out of time. But the Mediterranean climate area really is based off of exactly what you think, the Mediterranean Sea. And is a climate that was really good for sustaining certain types of agriculture, such as the growing of grapes, olives, figs, citrus fruits like lemons, and more. The most predominant crop being produced, though, in the Mediterranean region, like around the Mediterranean Sea, is still going to be wheat. But there's also going to be these other things here. So there are other regions like the Southern California coast that also have a similar climate and can produce many of these crops. And so I would definitely know that the Mediterranean crops are based on the name of the Mediterranean Sea, where during the old world, before the discovery of the Americas, all these crops were kind of native to this area and grown in this region. But California over here is also very notable for the growing of these things. So in the United States, this year is a very important. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about rural land use, and we're going to look at von Thünen, and we're going to spend some time looking at specialty crops. So you're going to see a lot of specialty crops being produced here in this unique Mediterranean climate in California. But kind of a long story short, a lot of the stuff that's being produced in that region is known as horticulture, which is the growing of flowers, fruits, and vegetables. Okay, so today's Valentine's Day, right? Had to go to Walmart and get some flowers for my boo. But a lot of those flowers are going to be produced in other countries. A lot of those flowers might be produced in places that are able to sustain that kind of climate area. That's horticulture. Different types of fruits like vegetables and growing of tomatoes, growing of grapes, growing of oranges. Any of that stuff is going to be examples of horticulture. And another way of looking at that is maybe market gardening. You might sometimes see that included in market gardening. I'm almost out of time. I'm probably going to skip a lot here. Just to kind of really quickly hit truck farming, just because I live in South Carolina and truck farming is huge here in the Southeast. But what's going on here is this is a form of extensive agriculture where farmers grow usually one, maybe two different types of crops. And they used to, in these areas, use trucks to take the crop from the farm into the market to be sold. And sometimes you might still see that at some of your local farmers markets and things like this. But today, most of these people are going to produce these crops to sell it to companies for canning, and then being resold maybe in local grocery stores or even in faraway grocery stores. I know that on the way to Myrtle Beach, which is like one of the biggest beach destinations in the country, really, but we go there every year, you can see all of these farms as far as the eye can see in both directions. And then these big billboard signs where they advertise the company they sell their beans to for canning. And so they're truck farming companies. Fishing. Looking at fishing and aquaculture are two different ways to classify and categorize fishing. Today, aquaculture is the cultivation of fish. Fishing is like what we do with our grandparents. You go outside and you catch wild fish out of the ocean or out of the pond or out of the river. But aquaculture is different in that you're actually raising them. And it's become more and more popular both in subsistence and commercial agriculture regions. There are major fishing regions out there. I wouldn't necessarily say to know what they are. And here is a really, really blurry map of them. This comes from the 12th edition of the Rubenstein book. But ones that I would definitely be familiar with is the Pacific Northwest, okay, and this Inland Asia region. These regions together produce more fish than, I mean, they're huge fish producing regions. The Pacific Northeast, you guys ever seen the Deadliest Catch TV show? You got some of that going on. The Atlantic Northeast is a big producer of fish. Overfishing is kind of an issue that you might run into in certain areas. You can look at the United Nations is kind of measuring that in a lot of the fishing regions, we tend to catch more than what's able to naturally reproduce. And so it's kind of a problem. Sorry, I know I went through those last couple ones really quick, but I want to finish up in time for us to do the Kahoot game. But this one here is from, I think, page 210 in the AMSCO review manual. And what it does is it gives a snapshot comparison between the agricultural regions listed on Whittlesey's map and some of the climate areas, as well as geographic locations that we talked about in this presentation. So I definitely wanted y'all to see that. Like I said, it is in the AMSCO book. I think it's page 210 if you guys have that. For your resources, these right here are spectacular videos that give you a lot of clarity on some of the things we talked about. The Remarkable Rice video is going to be a video that shows the start to finish production of rice agriculture. Up in Smoke looks at shifting agriculture and an alternative to that might be a little bit more good for the environment. It is part of a PBS documentary. This here's only 8-minute snapshot of that. Shifting agriculture. Warning about that link. I almost didn't share it with you, but it's really, really good for looking at, I guess, the very nature of what shifting agriculture is. But there is a section about 2 or 3 minutes into that video where there is like a Mortal Kombat scene, super graphic, heads ripped off, chicken sacrifice. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic, but yes, they sacrifice a chicken. And it's bloody. So be ready for that. If you guys want to see it, just know that's there. I'm telling you to look at it, not for that, but because it does a very good job at showing what shifting agriculture is and how it looks and how the people feel about it. And then these are here are videos by Caroline Bednarz that go over these agricultural regions. The first one is LDCs. I think the second one is MDCs. I might have them backwards in the way that I go over them. But she does a very good job at kind of summarizing a little bit about what I just said to you guys as well. And then there is our summary. Climate development play a leading role in what crops will be produced. Agriculture can be classified in many ways: subsistence, commercial, intensive, extensive, developing, developed, and climate region. MDCs use machines and stuff like this. LDCs use manual labor, lots of it, low amounts of capital. So we got through it. I know I kind of went fast a little bit at the end there, but I really, really wanted to give you all a little bit of time. I knew it was going to go a little bit over the questions at the end, but if y'all are y'all interested in playing some Kahoot? I don't know if y'all have ever played. The way it works is I'm going to show you guys a screen that's going to put the Kahoot game up there. It's going to show you guys a little bit of a like a link. Yeah, John David. There's a link that you guys can type into your browser. They'll take you straight to it. If you're using a device, then maybe as a QR code. I've never really used it with a device, but we're gonna go ahead and do that real quick. So let me go ahead and get that set up for you. So I'm gonna get ready. It's gonna play a little song. The questions are gonna come in randomly. Yes, it will give you a pin. The questions are going to come in randomly. It's going to also randomize the order of the distractors in the questions. So here we go. 12 questions. Are you ready? Woo! What type of agricultural practice is slash and burn? Oh, man. Definitely subsistence. Definitely subsistence. I wonder if it'll show you the leaderboard. Do I have to hit next? There we go. Bam. Brighton, good job with the getting off to a good start. Pretty close behind. All right. What form of agriculture is cash cropping? That one there is I'm not sure if I like that question because cash. I guess what they're looking at is the production of something on a plantation, which would be a form of extensive commercial agriculture done at LDCs. That's got to be the direction they're looking there. But I would have probably put like a specific kind there. So maybe that's my fault for not going into enough detail on that one. Okay. Vertically integrated food production is also known as so the reason why agribusiness is vertically integrated, and I didn't use that terminology. Again, I didn't put these questions together, so sorry about that. But what that means is that all parts of the production of the good is going to be vertical. In other words, the company will own the farms, the production, the factories, the trucks, the process of getting it into the stores. That's the reason why that would be vertical production. So maybe I should have looked at that terminology there, but that's okay. Seasonal herding of animals over short distances is known as. I'm sorry, Michaela, that's happening. I wish there was something I could do about that. Definitely transhumans. Good job, good job, good job. Which state is found in the Corn Belt of the United States? There we go. We looked at that as a grain producing state for sure, but that would definitely be part of the Corn Belt. MIT is killing it, followed closely by Brighton. Which invention had the biggest impact on the location of dairy farms? Now think about this one for sure. We didn't talk about it in this particular presentation, but it's definitely one we're going to look at some next. Yeah, refrigeration was a big deal. It's part of the reason why we have a lot of dairy farms kind of in the South as well. And refrigeration kind of helps with more than even just dairy. But what it did was next week we're going to talk about the milk shed. What this does is it increases what that milk shed area is so that, milk can be produced way further away from the market than what it used to be. back in the day. According to Von Thünen, which we're going to talk about next week, which model would be closest to the markets? All right. Yeah. So in that case right there, dairy is something that's going to spoil. And we just had one about refrigeration allowing us to do dairy further away. But the fact that that it could possibly spoil is usually why, according to Von Thünen, it's going to be really close by. All right. Which of the following is an example of intensive land use? You guys all get this one. Bam. Yep. I knew y'all were gonna hit that one real good. I knew y'all were gonna get that. Emma T is still in the head. John Davis giving her a good run for her money. Which of the following is not an example of Mediterranean agriculture? This one here is a little bit tricky. All right, yeah, good job. It's definitely oranges in Florida. Oranges in Florida is a form of specialty crop we're going to talk about more next week. And also the crops in California as well. But the difference here, I guess the main thing is centered on the climate. And Florida is definitely not going to be in that same kind of climate and can't support as many of the same types of fruits and vegetables and crops you would see in the Mediterranean. In a corn commodity chain, which step would come first? Yeah, so that's what we're looking at with a commodity chain, and that much I did intend to put on this presentation, but that's the process by which a good is going to be created and then eventually brought to the table that we eat on. All right, so next week I'll take a little bit of time to look mainly at coffee and cocoa commodity chains, because they're and maybe even some cotton with some shirts, but they're a really good way of understanding how this works. Sorry, I didn't get to that this week. Blank is the practice of promoting safe and sustainable farming methods. Fair trade. Yeah, all right, so I can see why some of y'all will have put sustainable development there. The thing here that you're looking at is that when we talk about, it actually mentions sustainable farming in the question there, so that's a little tricky. Sustainable development goals has to do with the United Nations, the goals that they agree on in order to create a way more than just agriculture, but a sustainable environment for us all to live in. But when you're looking at agriculture and you're looking at this idea of fair trade, it is a process by which companies are going to try to ensure that people that are farmers are paid fair wages for the crops they're able to produce. It prevents people from being taken advantage of. What is the term for a farm where no one lives and is farmed by migratory workers? Migratory workers. I can honestly say that I knew that because of context. I've never actually heard the term suitcase farm, so even I learned something on that one there. I knew that it wouldn't be any of these other three, so sometimes you have to break it down like that. So the podium, Emma T is the winner. John David English is up there in second place, and Sicko Mode for a distant third. Yeah, bro. So guys, I hope that was helpful. Next week, like I said, I'm gonna put together the questions myself, and I'll make sure that it's about things that I've covered for sure. Good job, Emma. I can tell you are paying attention in class. Yes. Miss Bannert, where you been? So I'm very glad you guys were able to come in and join me tonight. And yeah, we went over a little bit, but I think it's been really helpful. And so if this is helpful for you, make sure that you tell your friends about me. Tell your teachers. Nothing like a free. I mean, it can't hurt you to try a free live stream, right? So if you like the live streams, come back. If you want the past stuff and you want to really get into the practice mode for the AP exam, definitely think about paying $20. Same kind of costs as you're going to pay with any kind of other review manual, like Princeton Review or AMSCO or Barron's. I mean, it's all going to be $20. So I'm here if you need me. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot, Brighton, Emma, John David, Miss Banner. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you guys next time.